So, usually when we examine a really dense regulatory framework, I mean, think of like a corporate tax compliance manual, right?
Oh, yeah. Dry as bone.
Exactly. Or, even those incredibly granular terms and conditions you just blindly agree to when you're updating like enterprise software.
Right, the ones nobody actually reads.
Yeah, exactly. But if you do read them, there is this baseline expectation of just dry, almost brutal precision.
For sure. Because the architecture of a legal text, it's fundamentally binary, you know.
Right. It's just rules.
Yeah, it operates on conditionals. Like if you do this, then that happens. It's a closed system.
Designed to completely eliminate ambiguity.
Exactly, which leaves absolutely zero room for emotional expression or, any kind of romantic nuance.
Right. You read a legal document to find out where the boundaries lie, what the mechanics are, what the penalties are for crossing those lines. You certainly don't read it expecting, like, poetry,
No, definitely not.
which honestly creates this fascinating cognitive dissonance when we look at the source material we are unpacking in our deep dives today.
Yeah, it really does.
Because if you're listening to this, I want you to imagine opening up the most severe, penalty-laden, detail-obsessed manual of physical laws in antiquity.
We're talking extremely specific stuff here.
Right. And you open to page 1, paragraph 1, and before it even begins to detail the logistics and the measurements, the very first word is a secret, deeply romantic code of endearment.
Which is just wild when you think about the context.
It is. And that tension, that exact contradiction, is what we are exploring today. We are looking at a Hasidic philosophical discourse, a text known as a mamar, right?
Yeah, a mamar delivered back in the spring of 1972.
Right. And I should say right up front for you listening, our mission here isn't to take a theological position. We're
Sure.
not trying to endorse a specific religious worldview.
No, not at all. We're looking at the mechanics of it.
Exactly. We are treating this document purely as a masterclass in psychological architecture and like philosophical framework.
We just want to extract the underlying logic.
Yeah, how this text deconstructs human nature, the actual utility of the intellect, and the functional mechanics of humility, which we'll get into later.
It's a really brilliant framework if you look at it impartially.
So let's jump in. The text immediately zeroes in on the book of Leviticus, which is famously, I mean, the most rigorous, materially grounded text in the biblical canon.
Oh, absolutely. It is entirely consumed with the hyper-specific physical laws of animal sacrifices in the ancient temple.
Yeah, it's not light reading.
No.
And,
I mean, we are talking about the exact handling of blood, the precise sorting of internal organs, the meticulous measurements of
and
grain.
the schedules, right.
Yeah, the completely unforgiving schedules of the altar. It is a visceral, messy, and intensely physical domain.
Yet the author of this 1972 discourse focuses on the very first word of that brutal rule book, which is Vayikra.
Translating basically to, and he called.
Right. And the historical and linguistic commentary surrounding this specific Hebrew word reveals that it isn't merely like a functional summons.
It's not just someone yelling, hey, come here.
Exactly. It isn't just he spoke or he commanded. Vayikra is historically categorized as a term of deep affection,
Yeah, it's actually the language angels use to speak to one another, according to the tradition.
which is just beautiful. It is a loving, intimate call.
But that presents a massive structural paradox, right?
Oh, a huge one. Because if you want to express the highest, most transcendent affection from the divine to humanity, putting it at the opening of a visceral ledger about, slaughtering livestock.
It seems like the worst possible placement.
Literally the worst.
Oh.
Why hide this ethereal romantic dedication inside the most physically grounded, severe text?
Well, the discourse offers a major philosophical thesis to resolve that paradox right out of the gate.
Okay, lay it on me.
So, it argues that the ultimate revelation of high spiritual wisdom isn't just incidentally located next to these physical laws. It's actually specifically and exclusively found within them.
Right, exclusively.
Yeah. The text introduces this concept of the third fold Torah, which represents the absolute apex of divine revelation.
Right.
And it insists that this peak, this highest level, is only accessible through the gritty, uncompromising physical mechanics of the sacrifices.
Ah,
So the affection of Vayikra is present not in spite of the strict physical boundaries, but entirely because of them.
I mean, that completely challenges the standard assumption of how spirituality operates, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. Because what do people usually think?
Right. The general assumption is that spiritual elevation requires an escape from the physical world.
You go meditate on a mountain.
Exactly. You detach from material concerns, you eat kale, you seek pure abstraction.
You try to float above it all.
Yeah. But this framework is insisting that the deepest possible connection, the highest expression of this loving call, is realized in the dirt.
In the dirt, in the blood, and in the strict execution of those physical boundaries.
That really forces us to redefine what a connection actually means in this framework.
It does. And to explain why this transcendent love requires physical grounding, the author forces us to look at who is actually executing these laws.
The person bringing the sacrifice.
Exactly. The text isolates a very specific phrase in Leviticus. Adam ki yakrif mekem.
Which means when a man among you brings a sacrifice.
Right. And then the discourse asks a purely analytical question about the diction there. Why use the specific word Adam to denote the person?
Because there are other words for man.
Oh, plenty. The Hebrew language has multiple words for man or person. You have Ish, Yiver, Enosh.
So why Adam?
Well, choosing Adam is a deliberate, mathematically precise choice that basically unlocks the entire psychological mechanism of the text.
Okay, so to decode that choice, the author brings in two ancient foundational commentaries, right? And they present entirely different models of how two entities connect.
Yeah, let's break those down. The first model comes from the Midrash.
And what's the analogy there?
It uses the analogy of a belt clinging to a man's waist. The text categorizes this as the connection of kilium, which translates to vessels.
So the belt analogy. That's crucial for understanding like a mechanical connection.
Exactly. When you strap a leather belt around your waist, the belt and your body are tightly bound together, right? They move in unison.
But they're still two different things.
Exactly. They remain fundamentally separate ontological entities. The belt never actually becomes the body.
And the body doesn't become the belt.
Right. They're two distinct realities interacting through a mechanism of attachment. This is the nature of connecting vessels.
Got it. So it is a relationship of proximity and functional alignment, but not an essential merging.
Perfect way to put it. Now, contrast that mechanical attachment with the second model the text introduces.
Which comes from the Zohar.
Right. The Zohar analyzes the word Adam and links it to the concept of cleaving. It specifically references the verse, "And you who cleave to the Lord your God."
Okay, cleaving. That sounds a lot more intense than a belt.
It is. The text categorizes this second model as the connection of orot, or lights.
Whites instead of vessels.
Yeah. And this is an entirely different paradigm of relationship. If the belt represents a mechanical external attachment, the connection of lights represents an essential existential fusion.
Wow, okay. So it's more akin to like a biological integration.
Yes, like sharing a single nervous system or a single consciousness. You are no longer two distinct entities strapped together. The boundary between the two dissolves entirely.
So it's not holding hands. It's sharing a heartbeat.
Exactly. So the text then applies these two distinct models of connection, the mechanical belt and the existential fusion, directly to the act of the sacrifice itself.
How so?
It asserts that the physical components of the sacrifice, so the animal, the altar, the wood, the specific measurements, those constitute the vessels.
They are the belt.
Yes. The
Yeah.
physical action is the belt. It is the necessary mechanical attachment required to interact with the material world.
Right, because you need something physical to interact with the physical.
Exactly. It involves all the stratums of physical reality. The mineral of the salt, the vegetable of the wood and grain, the animal on the altar.
But a mechanical attachment is essentially inert on its own, right? I mean, it's just a container.
Exactly. The container requires an active catalyst to give it utility.
So if the meticulous physical execution of the law is merely the mechanical belt, the actual power that activates the entire system has to come from somewhere else.
It comes from the specific nature of the person performing the action.
Which is precisely why the text demands the word Adam.
You nailed it. The power that the text claims actually sustains the world is generated by the Adam who brings the sacrifice.
Okay, let me make sure I'm following this. In this philosophical architecture, Adam represents that second tier of connection.
The connection of lights.
Right, the existential fusion, the highest tier of the soul.
Yes. The text is outlining a system where a transcendent, indistinguishable spiritual unity, which is the mind, the Adam, is utilizing a grounded, messy physical action, which is the belt, the vessels, to actually affect reality.
So you need the integration of both systems.
You absolutely do.
The physical world provides the necessary friction and structure. It's the container. But the power to elevate that physical structure comes exclusively from the atom.
Because the human consciousness operates above the purely mechanical constraints of the world, it brings that high-frequency light down into the dense physical act.
I gotta say, this sounds incredibly abstract.
It does, but the text actually provides a mathematical formula to explain exactly how this human-to-animal connection works inside our own minds.
Right, this is where it gets really cool. The author uses gematria.
Yeah, the ancient system of numerology where every Hebrew letter holds a numerical value.
And in this analytical tradition, words that share the same numerical value are understood to share an intrinsic, like ontological relationship, right?
Exactly. There are different expressions of the exact same underlying reality.
Okay, so walk us through the math here.
All right, so the discourse examines the numerical value of Adam. It's spelled Aleph, Dalet, Mem.
Okay.
The total numerical value of those letters is 45.
45.
Right. And in the framework of this text, 45 correlates to a highly transcendent divine name known as Ma.
Yeah.
Yes, this number represents the spiritual lights. It is the intellect, the highest tier of the human soul. It's the capacity for abstract reasoning and divine fusion.
Okay, so the atom is the 45, the intellect.
Correct. Now, the text immediately contrasts the 45 with the target of the sacrifice, the animal.
Like the Hebrew word for animal is behema.
Yes, and the numerical value of behema is 52.
52, so we have 45 and 52.
Right, and 52 correlates to a completely different divine configuration known as Ban. The 52 represents the lower tier of reality, the vessels, the physical containment.
And crucially, the untamed physical drives, right?
Yeah, exactly. This math fundamentally shifts the entire text from an ancient historical commentary into basically a blueprint for human psychology.
This is the part that I find so fascinating. Because when the text says, when an atom brings a sacrifice of a behema, it is no longer talking about a literal sheep or goat on a stone altar.
No, it's totally internal.
The 52, the behema, represents the internal animal soul that exists within every single human being.
We are talking about the amygdala-driven instincts.
Yeah, the drive for mere survival, the reactive anger.
The territorial resource hoarding.
Right, the unrefined ego. That is the 52.
The psychological mechanism the text is revealing here is just profound. Because the objective of the sacrifice is not to appease an angry deity through the destruction of life.
Which is how most people historically misread it.
Oh, absolutely. That is a rudimentary misreading of the architecture. The real objective is internal alchemy.
Internal alchemy, I like that.
Yeah, the text is laying out a system where you must utilize the transcendent intellectual capacity of your consciousness, your inner atom, the 45.
Right.
To elevate, direct, and refine the raw, chaotic, reactive energy of your own inner animal, the 52.
So you are not destroying the animal.
Not at all. You are integrating its massive caloric energy into a higher purpose.
Because the animal soul isn't inherently evil, is it? It is just unrefined energy.
Exactly. Think of it like a wild horse. A wild horse has immense power, but without a rider, that power is chaotic and it can be destructive.
Right. The 45 is the rider.
Yes. The intellect provides the telos, the direction.
And this perfectly explains why the text insists on the phrasing Adam ki yakriv. The process has to initiate from the 45.
Because the animal cannot refine itself.
Right, because, a survival instinct can't really logic its way into being transcendent or altruistic.
It literally doesn't have the hardware for it. It requires the intervention of the higher intellect to reach down and guide it.
So we have the 45 reaching down to guide the 52. But this brings us to a massive philosophical collision in the text, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because if the entire goal of this system is to use the high intellect to reach down into the physical world, to bring the 45 down to refine the 52, we run into a severe paradox regarding the actual ultimate value of the physical world itself.
Right, and the author highlights this paradox by examining a historical narrative involving King David.
Okay, so the text notes that King David, who is, famously the architect of the Psalms, he faced divine punishment for referring to the Torah, this high spiritual wisdom, as songs or zmirat.
Which is super confusing at first.
Yeah, because on a superficial reading, calling a text A beautiful song appears to be like the highest form of praise.
You'd think so, but the flaw wasn't in the word song, it was in the underlying logic of David's praise.
Okay, explain that.
The commentary explains that David praised the Torah by marveling at how its intricate grammar and structural details are basically responsible for sustaining the existence of the entire physical universe.
Okay, so his argument was essentially, this wisdom is magnificent because it is the engine that keeps the physical world running.
Exactly. And the text argues that framing the Torah's greatness entirely around its utility to the physical world is actually a profound insult to the Torah's infinite nature.
An insult, wow.
Yeah, because the author introduces the concept of the infinite light, and relative to the absolute, ungraspable infinity of that light, the finite physical world is just a statistical zero.
It is entirely insignificant.
Exactly. Therefore, praising an infinite, boundless reality by pointing out how well it manages a microscopic, finite constraint is a total failure of comprehension.
Wait, it would be like encountering an alien intelligence capable of bending space and time and praising it by saying, wow, you make a really highly efficient digital clock.
Yes. That's a great analogy. It completely diminishes the infinite by binding its value to the finite.
Okay, but let's wrestle with this for a second, because the discourse seems to be directly contradicting its own foundational premise here.
How so?
Well, we established in the very first segment that the ultimate revelation, the deepest affection of Vayikra, is found exclusively in the physical sacrifices, right?
Right.
And we just finished concluding that the entire psychological goal is for the intellect to engage with the messy reality of the 52.
Yes, the animal.
But now, the text pivots and declares that the physical world is essentially a statistical zero, and praising the infinite for sustaining it is an insult.
I see the problem.
Yeah, how can both be true? How can the physical world be simultaneously the ultimate vessel for divine affection and completely insignificant?
It's a great question, and this is really the central paradox of the discourse. To resolve it, the author forces us to distinguish between two completely distinct ontological layers.
Okay, what are they?
Revelation versus essence. Or, if we use the Hebrew terminology from the text, Galui versus Awtsmoos.
Kalui and Awtsmoos. All right, let's break down those two layers, starting with revelation.
Okay, so revelation is the outward expression. It is the light radiating from the source.
The emanation.
Exactly. When you evaluate reality purely from the perspective of revelation, the light King David's math was wrong.
Because the light is just so overwhelmingly vast and infinite that any finite construct like our physical universe is completely eclipsed.
Right. From the perspective of the light, the physical world truly is insignificant. It's zero.
So, if you are looking at the emanation, the physical world is nothing. So where does the essence, the Awtsmoos, change the equation?
Well, the essence is the core reality. It's the absolute source that precedes both the light and the darkness, the infinite and the finite.
It's the root of everything.
Yes. And because the essence is truly absolute, it is not bound by the dichotomy of high or low.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't need to reside in an infinite spiritual vacuum to maintain its status. In fact, the text argues that the ultimate desire of this ungraspable essence was specifically to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds.
Which is a concept known as dira betactina.
Exactly, dira betactinum.
So let me get this straight. The ultimate desire of the absolute highest possible reality is to manifest in the absolute lowest possible reality.
Yes. The essence actually desires the friction of the finite. Think about it. From the perspective of the light, descending into the messy physical world is a constriction. It's a diminishment.
Right, because it has to squeeze itself into a box.
Exactly. But from the perspective of the essence, descending into the physical world is the entire objective.
So the physical world is insignificant compared to the light of the Torah, but it is the ultimate fulfillment of the essence of the Torah.
You got it perfectly.
That distinction fundamentally rewires how we view the execution of these laws.
Totally.
Because engaging with the physical world, doing the granular, mundane tasks of the sacrifices, or, in a modern context, dealing with the frustrating realities of daily life, it isn't a distraction from high spiritual pursuit.
No, it is the peak of the pursuit.
So King David was corrected because he evaluated the system from the tier of revelation where the world is small.
Right. He missed the tier of essence where the physical dirt is actually the exact canvas the infinite wants to paint on.
That is just a massive shift in perspective, and it resolves why the book of Leviticus opens with a romantic call.
Exactly. The greatest intimacy, the deepest connection, it doesn't occur when you escape the world into pure abstraction.
It occurs when you take the absolute highest spiritual reality and successfully synthesize it with the absolute lowest physical reality.
That's the whole ballgame. And to ground this massive philosophical architecture, the discourse actually employs a very precise metaphor from the natural world.
Right, it references the Tanya.
Yeah, the Tanya, which is the foundational text of Hasidic thought. And it compares the descent of this divine wisdom to the behavior of water flowing from a high elevation down to a lower one.
But the text is incredibly careful to distinguish the behavior of water from the concept of Hesed, right?
Hmm.
Which translates to kindness or benevolence.
Yes. The author insists that comparing the descent of wisdom merely to an act of kindness is fundamentally inadequate.
It has to be understood through the physics of water.
It has to be water.
Let's explore the psychological difference between kindness and water, because I think this is where it gets super applicable to, just being a person.
Yeah.
On the surface, an act of pure altruism, like a wealthy individual descending from their position of power to distribute resources to the destitute. That seems like the perfect parallel for divine wisdom coming down to the physical world, doesn't it?
It does. The energy is flowing from high to low.
So why does the text reject this model?
The text rejects the model of kindness because of the subtle preservation of ego.
The ego.
Yeah. When a person engages in pure benevolence, no matter how noble the intent, their identity remains tethered to the high place.
Right. The act of giving often just reinforces the giver's awareness of their own elevation.
Exactly. They are engaging with the low place, but they are doing so as a visitor. They retain their status.
They are graciously descending, but their true home remains at the top.
Right. The act of charity subtly relies on the power dynamic remaining intact. The giver enjoys the existential feeling of being the benefactor.
Okay, so how does water operate differently?
Water operates on an entirely different physical and psychological principle. When water flows from a mountain peak into a valley, it does not graciously descend.
It doesn't pat itself on the back.
No. It completely vacates the high place. It doesn't leave a residual amount of its identity at the peak.
Its inherent nature is to relentlessly seek the absolute lowest possible point.
Yes. Water doesn't view the peak as its true home. Its resting state, its ultimate equilibrium is at the bottom.
So water represents complete ego death. It has no attachment to elevation.
Exactly. And the discourse uses this exact physics to describe the true nature of the intellect's descent into the physical world.
So the Transcendent 45 doesn't just visit the 52 as a favor while maintaining its, ivory tower status.
No, like water, it completely abandons the high place because its ultimate purpose, the diabolictonum, the dwelling place in the lower world, can only be realized at the absolute bottom.
And the author intricately ties this concept of water back to the linguistic roots of the word atom, doesn't he?
Yeah, he points out a brilliant etymological duality. Atom is actually derived from two completely conflicting roots.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first root connects to the phrase Adamelion, which basically translates to, I will be like the Most High.
Okay, so that represents the upward trajectory, the mind, the intellect, the 45, reaching for absolute transcendence and infinite light.
Right. But the second root of Adam is the word Adama.
Which translates to earth, dirt, or dust.
Exactly. It is the absolute lowest, most dense base material of reality.
So the text is arguing that the definition of true human greatness, the realized Adam, is the successful synthesis of these two contradictory directions.
Yes, the intellect must ascend to the Most High, but it must simultaneously behave like water and flow relentlessly down to the dust.
That completely dismantles the archetype of, the isolated philosopher on the mountain.
Totally. Because true brilliance isn't measured by how far it can detach from reality into pure theory.
It's measured by how effectively it can flow down and organize the messy, chaotic reality of the physical world. The 45 must penetrate the 52.
But that creates a severe practical challenge.
Yeah, how does a human consciousness actually achieve this state? How does a highly developed intellect, someone who has done the work to reach the Most High, willingly descend into the mundane dust without their ego corrupting the whole process.
Well, the text identifies one non-negotiable prerequisite for this water-like state.
And that is humility.
Humility, yes. The discourse states that the ultimate manifestation of this water flowing into the dust is found in halacha.
Halacha, which is the vast body of practical physical law.
Right, it's the system that dictates how you tie your shoes, what you eat, how you conduct business.
It is the ultimate low place where high wisdom lands.
Exactly. And the text asserts that the human mind can only correctly deduce and align with true halacha through absolute humility.
And to prove this mechanism, the text provides two specific historical case studies, right?
Yes, let's look at the first one. It examines the ancient legal debates between two dominant schools of thought, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai.
These are the heavyweights.
Huge heavyweights. And the text points out that the legal rulings of Beit Hillel were almost universally adopted as the accepted practical law, the final halacha.
But it is crucial to note why Beit Hillel won.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they didn't win. Because their initial arguments were like mathematically superior in a vacuum, or because they just out-debated their opponents through sheer intellectual dominance.
No, the text states explicitly that the law followed Beit Hillel because they were humble and submissive.
Okay, but what did that actually look like in practice?
The operational manifestation of this humility was their debate methodology. Before Beit Hillel would present their own legal arguments, they would actively study, articulate, and actually prioritize the opinions of their rivals, Beit Shammai.
That is the ultimate execution of the water principle.
It really is.
They completely abandon the high place of their own ego. They detach their identity from the need to be right.
Yes. By studying their opponent's views first, they removed their own bias from the equation. They became a clean conduit.
And because they possessed that specific mechanical lack of ego, they were able to perceive the truth of the essence.
Exactly. Now, the text provides a second historical example, returning to the logistical narrative of the temple sacrifices.
Right. It examines the tribe of Issachar, specifically the actions of their prince, Nethanel ben Zuar.
Yeah. So during the dedication of the temple, the 12 tribes brought their inaugural sacrifices on consecutive days.
Okay.
And Nethanel brought the sacrifice for Issachar on the second day of the month.
Now, in a text where every detail is deliberate, the sequence of these sacrifices is obviously heavily scrutinized.
Of course. And the historical context here is key. The tribe of Issachar was universally recognized as the tribe of profound Torah scholars.
They were the intellectuals.
They possessed the highest intellect. In fact, it was Issachar who originally formulated the logistical advice on how the tribe should even organize these dedicatory sacrifices.
So they designed the very system being executed.
They did.
Logically, the architects of the system, the intellectual heavyweights who designed the process, should have claimed the right to initiate it. They should have gone first.
You would think so. Yet the text points out that Issachar humbly stepped aside and allowed the tribe of Judah to bring their sacrifice on the first day.
Judah being the tribe associated with kingship, execution, and action.
Right. Issachar deliberately took the second slot.
This perfectly illustrates the relationship between the 45 and the 52.
How so?
Because if your pursuit of high intellectual knowledge results in arrogance, if it makes you demand the first slot, if it makes you elevate yourself above others, you have fundamentally failed the assignment.
You're operating under the paradigm of kindness.
Exactly. You are maintaining your status in the high place rather than operating under the paradigm of water. True intellect naturally generates humility.
Which brings the entire philosophical architecture full circle to the very first word of the text we discussed. Vayikra.
The loving call.
Yes. The text reveals a striking visual detail regarding how this word is physically constructed in a handwritten Torah scroll.
This is where the conceptual framework becomes a physical artifact. I love this part.
Yeah, so a scribe is governed by extremely strict rules when writing the scroll. And the final letter of the word Vayikra is an aleph.
Okay.
However, the scribe is commanded to write this specific aleph, significantly smaller than all the standard letters surrounding it.
It is historically known as the small aleph.
Right.
But why conclude a grand, cosmic term of endearment with a diminished letter?
The discourse explains that the small aleph is the visual representation of the humility of Moses, who was the recipient of the call.
And Moses is recognized in this tradition as the ultimate human intellect, the greatest prophet, the man who directly interfaced with the divine.
He possessed unparalleled greatness.
But we need to define the exact nature of this humility, because it is often completely misunderstood.
It really is.
The text is not suggesting that Moses suffered from imposter syndrome. He didn't have low self-esteem, and he didn't walk around falsely claiming he lacked talent.
Right. That is not humility. That is neurosis, or worse, performative fake humility.
Exactly. Denying your actual capacity is a form of ego. It is a distortion of reality.
True humility in this framework is better understood through the metaphor of a flawless pane of glass.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. A perfectly clean window allows maximum light to pass through it precisely because it is invisible. It doesn't draw any attention to itself.
It doesn't distort the light with its own smudges or colors.
Right. Moses was fully aware of his immense intellectual capacity. He knew he was the window, but he attributed his capacity entirely to the divine source, rather than his own ego.
He made himself a transparent conduit. He became the small Aleph.
And the psychological conclusion of the text here is just staggering. Because Moses successfully neutralized his ego because he became the small, transparent Aleph, he created an internal vacuum.
He removed himself from the space.
Yes. And into that empty space, the infinite, affectionate call of Vayikra could flow unimpeded. He became the ultimate vessel for the ultimate light.
He used his supreme 45 intellect to act as water, flowing down to the lowest point of the small Aleph, which allowed him to perfectly execute the highly physical, grounded laws of the 52.
It is a mathematically perfect philosophical loop.
It really is. The romantic affection requires the strict physical boundary. The physical boundary requires the human consciousness.
And the human consciousness must use its highest intellect to refine its lowest animal instincts.
And that entire system is only activated when the intellect operates with the absolute, egoless humility of water.
So this 1972 discourse takes what appears to be an archaic, bloody manual of ancient rituals and completely decodes it into a highly actionable blueprint for human psychology.
It says the highest knowledge you acquire shouldn't detach you from the friction of reality. It shouldn't lock you in an ivory tower of abstract superiority.
Your intellect should flow downward like water.
Its primary function is to engage with and refine your lowest, most reactive, survival-driven instincts. And the only way to successfully execute that internal alchemy is to adopt the mechanics of the small Aleph. Recognizing your immense capacity, but entirely removing your ego from the execution of it.
It is a rigorous framework for continuous internal refinement. But as we conclude our analysis of this material today, the text leaves us with one final, deeply provocative trajectory to consider.
I am ready. What is it?
In its closing lines, the discourse states that this exhaustive internal work, the 45 refining the 52, is ultimately a preparation for the physical sacrifices in the third temple, which will be built speedily in our days.
Okay.
Now, if we maintain our analytical lens and apply the psychological architecture we've just spent the last hour deconstructing, we have to ask what this third temple actually represents.
Right. What if we don't view it merely as a future architectural structure waiting to be built?
Exactly. What if the third temple described in this framework represents an evolutionary leap in human consciousness? Yeah, think about it. We currently live in a state of friction, where the intellect must constantly intervene to manage, suppress, or redirect the reactive energy of the inner animal.
It's a constant battle.
But imagine a future psychological state achieved through generations of this internal refinement, where the animal within us is so thoroughly elevated that it no longer requires management.
A state where our survival instincts, our territorial drives, and our reactive ego naturally and instinctively desire the exact same transcendent goals as our highest intellect.
A total frictionless synthesis of the 45 and the 52.
A reality where the mechanical attachment of the belt and the existential fusion of the mind are completely indistinguishable.
Yes.
Where the severe restrictive task manual and the infinite romantic love letter are no longer a paradox, because the execution of the strictest physical law is experienced in real time purely as an expression of absolute affection.
That is the horizon this text is pointing toward.
That is just an extraordinary psychological horizon to contemplate. Thank you for joining us, listener, on this deep dive into the architecture of the mind, the mechanics of humility, and the physics of the soul. Keep wrestling with these frameworks, keep flowing like water, and whatever you do, stay curious.